January 2nd, 2026. Welcome back to my channel. I'm Felicia, and today I wanted to talk about something that I didn't quite feel like talking about yesterday when I made a video, so I'll just get it out of the way now, and I want to talk about my baby. As you can see, I am quite pregnant. I think this sweater makes me look even more pregnant than I looked yesterday. I told you my belly's growing every day. I am starting to kind of get short of breath, so if I ever sound a little breathless, it's probably because my organs are being pushed up right now and I'm getting less internal space than I'm used to. I kind of hinted at in my last video that my baby was going to have some medical challenges when he was born, and I thought I could just talk about that a little bit. So first of all, this pregnancy has been difficult from the very beginning. Something felt a little off. I had my first ultrasound when I was about 4 weeks, maybe 5 weeks, which is very early, but I knew I was pregnant. My tests at home were positive, and my blood test that I had at my primary care doctor was positive as well. But I had this ultrasound scheduled because I was actually investigating my fertility. It had been a few years since I had my daughter, and we hadn't gotten pregnant yet. And so I wanted to make sure there wasn't any issues. I do have painful periods, and so I was concerned about endometriosis, which I still don't know if I have or not. It's something that you can't really find out until you do basically a surgery to diagnose it, which is a lot. Anyway, I had this ultrasound scheduled anyway, and I thought, well, this is great timing. I know I'm pregnant. Maybe we can see a tiny little baby in there. But it was odd because they didn't see anything at all. In fact, they noted that there was no sign of pregnancy. And I was like scratching my head leaving the appointment, thinking, what on earth? Like, I know I'm pregnant. I feel pregnant. I was already, having all of the early symptoms and everything. And then my doctor called me with the test results from my blood test that I had done a few days prior, and they're like, congratulations, you are pregnant. And so here I was 1 minute ago being told you have no sign of pregnancy in your uterus at all, to my doctor saying congratulations. So it was a bit odd. So I went back to the doctor to have my HCG levels tested, because they don't do that as a standard pregnancy test. And so I had to get my blood drawn again, and then I had to wait a few more days after that draw to compare the previous draw, to see if they're elevating, because you want to see those levels go up like 2.5 times or something like that. And so my HCG level rose 5 times, which is higher than is to be expected, I guess. And I didn't know this, but apparently when you have a baby with Down syndrome, having an elevated HCG level is normal in that pregnancy. And so I had really severe morning sickness that ensued shortly after, and lasted well into probably about 16 weeks along. So, I was already into my second trimester, still getting sick, nauseous, having an aversion to foods and smells, and everything that goes along with morning sickness, which is actually 24/7 sickness. It's not just in the mornings. In fact, it seemed to be worse at night, like toward the end of the day. So I decided to do an NIPT test early on because I wanted to know the gender. I didn't find out my daughter's gender until pretty far along. I was probably 6 months pregnant before I even found out if she was a boy or a girl. And so this time around, I didn't want to wait that long. I thought it would be easier to think about baby names and all of that if we knew early. And so I got a blood draw, and it's a non-invasive prenatal test. I thought, well, that's not so bad, just to get, go to the lab and get my blood drawn. And then it took a while to get my results, but when they did, they called me and they asked me if I wanted to know the gender, and I said yes, I do. And they told me, you're having a boy. And there was like a 1-2 second pause in there where I got to feel like happy and celebrate, hey, I'm having a boy, before they told me, but I'm sorry to tell you, he came back as having a high risk for Down syndrome, for trisomy 21. And I didn't quite even know what that was. I mean, I knew what Down syndrome was, and it kind of took me a second to process it, to register it. I kept thinking, this is so strange, I don't have a family history of it. Again, I didn't know much about Down syndrome. Apparently it's not hereditary in most cases. There's a very rare type of Down syndrome that can be passed down genetically, but most of the time it is a totally sporadic, random event, and it can be caused, or rather not caused, but there can be a higher risk factor if you have advanced maternal age. And so again, I felt a little odd because I'm not that old. I'm 34, so I am older, but I didn't think that sort of a thing was really going to be a risk until I was a bit older. So it really was a shock. It was very surprising news to hear. And there was a bit of denial in that too, because I thought, this can't be right. And they said that the test isn't definitive, but it is highly accurate. And so I had a shred of hope there, thinking, well, it's not for certain. Maybe they're wrong. Maybe this is a false positive. It just so happens I had an appointment with a genetic counselor that afternoon that they called me. They called me in the morning with the news for the NIPT, and I had an appointment that afternoon because I was planning on seeing the maternal fetal medicine doctor anyway, because my daughter was born with a heart defect, a very rare heart defect actually, that only affects 1 in 50,000 people. And I wanted to get this baby's heart looked at, considering she had a heart defect. And so that was always part of the plan, and was to meet with the MFM doctor. And then, of course, when we got the NIPT test results, they had me meet with a genetic counselor. And so what I thought was going to be a fairly quick appointment ended up being hours long. They really went in depth over every possible thing that can come along with having Down syndrome, how it's, can be structured, all of the various health challenges that can come along with that too. And it was kind of scary to hear all of that, because I'm like, well, this is a lot. This is a lot of information to be given in one day. And I decided that I wanted to know for sure. 95% accuracy sounds probably like enough for a lot of people. It wasn't really for me. I like to know for sure. I like to be prepared. I like to know what to expect and plan, and I didn't want any surprises, because with my daughter, we were very surprised. We didn't think there was anything wrong with her. We thought we were having a totally healthy baby girl, and after she was born, it turns out that wasn't exactly the case, and we were rushed to a children's hospital, to the NICU, and that's a story for another time. But we didn't want to go through that shock again. We wanted to know early and be prepared. So I decided to go through with the invasive prenatal testing, which there's 2 different things you can do, something called a CVS and something called an amniocentesis. CVS is a little riskier, and it frankly sounded a bit more painful. I don't need to talk about that, but I decided to do the amniocentesis, which they agreed is the kind of the best route to go, because sometimes even if you do the CVS, you may still require an amniocentesis Anyway, I thought, well, I'm not doing it twice. If I'm going to do an invasive test, I'll just do it once. And there was a less than 1% chance of miscarriage in having this test done. So there was a risk there that I really had to consider, because I wanted to keep this baby despite any challenges that we were going to face. And so there was a lot of guilt in even doing the test, because it was really just for myself to know, because we didn't have to do any kind of testing. We could have just waited until we had the baby and decided or learned what was, you know, going to be, I guess, wrong with him after he was born. But I wanted to know before. You're in your second trimester by the time you get that test done, and I actually ended up having to wait longer. I had to wait an extra week because my amnio chlorine bands were not fused. So essentially, like, my womb layers weren't like completely fused until later than what is normal, I guess. And so that was a bit of an odd thing. And in this period of waiting to get this test done, I had talked to numerous people who had told me that they had false positive NIPT tests. My own dentist had a false positive for Down syndrome, and I thought, well, this is giving me hope that I hadn't had before. Also because I had an anatomy scan done of the baby, an ultrasound, and the doctor told me, you know, if I didn't know your NIPT test results, I would think you were just having a normal baby because he looks great. Early on in my pregnancy, he did have some increased nuchal translucency, but not very much. And that's basically fluid buildup at the back of the neck, and that can be a soft marker for Down syndrome. He also had a slightly hypoplastic nasal bone, meaning it's a bit underdeveloped, but that's also a soft marker, meaning it's not a way to diagnose it. It just happens to be something that occurs more often in babies with Down syndrome, but it can also happen in babies that are normal. And I keep using that word normal, and it almost sounds like offensive to me because, you know, it's just, there's no better word to use, I guess. But he looked normal, and I hadn't miscarried like they said I could. The genetic counselor said I had like a 30% chance of miscarrying early in my pregnancy, and I do still have apparently a high risk, higher than normal, just because he has Down syndrome. But you know, the fact that I've made it this far, he's to the point where I mean, he could be viable if I were to have the baby right this minute. And so, you know, I think he's gonna make it. I think I'm gonna have a live baby. But anyway, I had some hope. I had kind of developed more hope than I had for a while as I got closer to the amnio test. But anyway, I did the test, and I had regret right away because as I was laying there, they bring this big needle out, they stick it into your belly through your uterus, and I had pain, like instant pain. Everything just cramped up, and it hurt so bad. And I remember looking up at the screen, at the monitor, so I could see, because it's guided by ultrasound. They want to make sure that they don't puncture the baby. And he looked so scared. He like swam up to the top of the uterus, was flipping around, rolling around. He was trying to get away from that needle that was like sucking in the fluids. And it becomes a catheter. They pull the needle out, and there's just like a catheter, like a straw, pulling in your amniotic fluid. And that is apparently a normal response, a neurologically normal response. It's called, I think, like fetal escape response or something like that. because, I mean, that has to be a bit shocking for a little fetus to have something come into their house and pull their water out. And after a minute, and so that's where I had the regret, was in seeing him have that startle response, because I didn't expect that. I didn't think he was gonna freak out. And so I thought, oh no, I've done something wrong. Like, I'm gonna have a miscarriage now because I did this dumb test. But after a minute, he calmed down, and he actually came back down, and he grabbed it. He grabbed the catheter with his little hand. And the doctor was like joking, like, baby, let go of that. It was kind of interesting to see all of that, because it just shows the complexity there, like the thinking, the gripping, I mean, I actually felt more reassurance that maybe he didn't have Down syndrome after that, seeing his response. But that wasn't the case. And after that test too, I had really bad cramping, like for about a day and a half. Like I just had so much like remorse and regret, because I thought, oh no, like I'm gonna be like that 1% that miscarries because I had to know. And thankfully that wasn't the case. But I don't think I'll ever do an invasive prenatal test again, because of how I felt and the guilt I felt after that test. But yeah, I had bad cramping. I didn't bleed. I didn't have fluid leaking. Everything was fairly good as far as recovery goes after that kind of a test. I just had bad cramping. And so after a few weeks, it actually took a really, really long time, longer than normal, and it kind of happened around like Thanksgiving and the holidays, so I think that kind of pushed back, you know, maybe the lab took longer to do, or the doctors just took longer to get a hold of me. But they finally did call me back and let me know that he in fact has trisomy 21. I'm really glad I did the test, even though I did have that deep sense of regret immediately following the test, because I know now, and I didn't have a miscarriage as a result of getting that test done. And so, you know, the guilt has finally left me. If I were to have a late term miscarriage, it wouldn't be because of that. At this point, I'm far enough along that if I were to have a miscarriage or a stillbirth, it's probably going to be because of his own development, particularly with his heart. And so that is the next thing I guess there is to talk about regarding him, is that I had a fetal echocardiogram done just a couple weeks ago, and I found out that he has a large hole in his heart, which is actually very common in babies with Down syndrome. It affects about 40, sometimes 50%, let's just say about half of babies with Down syndrome will end up having a heart defect. And this particular type of defect is the most common that they experience, which is a hole. It's in his lower ventricles, and they did say that there is a small chance that it could close on its own. There is a piece of tissue still attached that kind of flaps when the blood is flowing through it. There's a possibility it could fuse, but it's unlikely. He's most definitely going to need to have a heart surgery, but it may not be something that has to happen right away. It can wait until he's 6 months or older. It's basically one of those things that we have to wait and see about, to see how symptomatic he is, how his breathing is, how his feeding is, is the heart failing? Like there's things that we're going to need to look out for. I'm going to be getting another echo, I think at about 30 weeks along, and then after he's born, they'll do another echo to see how the heart's doing and if it's something that can wait, and if the hole is closing on its own, which would be a miracle, but they happen sometimes, and so I do have some hope for him that, that won't be necessary, but I'm pretty much expecting him to need to have probably open heart surgery. If it becomes a small hole, then there's a chance he could do a catheterization procedure, which is where they make an incision in the groin and go up through the artery to reach the heart through a catheter, which is, I guess, a bit less invasive than the chest being cut open. And so, I'm hoping for that, but I'm expecting him to need to have his heart repaired. And there's another issue with one of the arteries coming from the heart called the subclavian artery. It goes out toward your shoulder. You have, I think, two of them, a left and a right. And one of his actually goes behind his esophagus. It's not directed the way it should be. It's a bit abnormal, which can be asymptomatic. In fact, the cardiologist said that most of the time it is asymptomatic, meaning it doesn't cause any problem. It just is an anatomical finding, which is also very common in babies with trisomy 21. So there's two issues with his heart. One that will most likely need to be repaired, but the other one may or may not need to be, and if it does, it can probably wait until he's older. Apparently, with that particular issue, it doesn't always appear symptomatic until they're older, and it can cause some feeding issues because of how it affects the esophagus. It can cause breathing issues potentially as well, and sometimes it can actually encircle the esophagus, which sounds a little scary. So I'm hoping for the best outcome with that, and with the hole in his heart, I definitely hope that it repairs itself, but if it doesn't, I have a lot of faith that surgery will be a good outcome for him. I've unfortunately spent time in the NICU already. I know what to expect with that, and I think that I'm stronger for having gone through that experience with my daughter, and I'm more, emotionally prepared than I was with her, and so I think I'm ready to face this challenge. Sometimes I catch myself thinking that I'm unlucky for having gone through this twice, having two children with disabilities, but then I reframe it, and I remember that I'm actually very blessed. I'm so blessed to have children at all, and to be a mother. It's been literally the best thing in my life. I'll pat myself on the back a little bit and let myself know I'm a good mom, and I try really hard to provide everything for my children and more. I don't just want them to be doing well, I want them to thrive, and having a disability doesn't mean your life is less worthy. It doesn't mean that you won't be happy. If anything, it gives my life more purpose to be able to take care of these children, and so I do feel very blessed, and I'm looking forward to my son being here and getting to meet him and seeing how my daughter and him interact. She's going to be such a good big sister. There are things in this world that are beyond your control. I'm a believer in God, and I think that He decides our path. We do have free will and agency, but He guides us, and He doesn't give us more than we can handle. And He also doesn't make mistakes. I don't think that any of us are mistakes. And my children certainly are not mistakes. So anyway, that's kind of the story about how my pregnancy's been going, and what my son's challenges are going to be. We don't know it all, of course. We'll know more after he's born. There was a concern that he was going to have some limited fetal growth because of where the placenta cord is attached. It's right on the edge of my placenta, but so far he's measuring right on track. He's not underweight, he's not small, he's looking pretty healthy, all things considered. Anyway, thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe if you want to see more videos about me talking about my life. I hope that you all have a good day, and see you next time.